Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is November 26th, 2023, Sunday, November 26th, 2023. And for all of you that are going to be listening to this, happy holidays, happy Thanksgiving, happy Merry Christmas, happy New Year, happy holidays, because we're down in the home stretch of the year, but weird stuff is always going on no matter what time of year it is. And the first story that we're going to look at appears on Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled Adults and Children Sacrificed to Serve in the Afterlife. In 2021, a mummified man was found in Peru. Then a year later, the remains of 20 sacrifice victims were discovered around him. Cajamarquilla is an ancient city on the outskirts of Lima, Peru. The site is considered a pre-Hispanic mud city which could have housed between 10,000 and 20,000 people in an area of 413 acres. It is here that the mummy of a man, bound in a fetal position, was found inside a tomb. His age is estimated to be either in his 20s or 30s. He was dubbed Chabelo. The victims surrounding Chabelo are 12 adults and 8 children, wrapped in funerary bundles. The children, some of them infants, showed signs of violence such as fractures. Chances are they were killed in order to accompany the man, who was a noble or man of importance, into the afterlife. The adults were possibly his servants in life. The man was estimated to have lived around 1,000 years ago, when Cajamarquilla, situated in the Jicamarca Valley, had 4 pyramids and was an important trading point between the coast and mountain populations in Peru. At this time, the city was occupied by the Wari people, who predated the Incas. Below Chabelo's tomb, another burial chamber containing a woman and an infant were found. They were surrounded by ceramic objects. There was also food and the remains of a dog and an Andean guinea pig. In May 2023, another mummy was found at Cajamarquilla. The sacrificial victim was a 12 or 13-year-old, but the sex has not been determined. The child lived more than 1,000 years ago. Like the other mummies, it was wrapped in a funerary bundle and still had pieces of skin and tufts of hair. It was found approximately 200 yards from where the first mummy of Cajamarquilla was found in 2021. Next to the mummy was the remains of a dog and an Andean guinea pig, as well as various artifacts including a stone weapon called a boleadora, a mate plate, a copper needle, remains of textiles, corn, and chili peppers. There are plans to continue the excavation and send the remains for DNA testing. Nicknamed in October of 2023, a mummy discovered in 1995 at the top of Ampato volcano, which is 19,685 feet above sea level, was given a face. Nicknamed Juanita, examination of the remains have determined that she was sacrificed between 1440 to 1450 AD, and she was between 13 to 15 years of age. She was about 4 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 77 pounds. She was well nourished. The cause of death seems to be a severe blow to the right occipital lobe, as shown in a CT scan. A facial reconstruction was made with a model of her skull. She is one of several children that have been found sacrificed and left in the mountain peaks in Peru. And this right here, for those of you watching the video, this up here, this is the reconstruction of Juanita, and this is what she looked like when she was discovered. And of course, the reason why these mummies are so well preserved is because we're talking almost 20,000 feet up in the mountains. It's very cold, and it just naturally preserves them. And you could say whatever you like about this being part of a culture, because even in Celtic times and even in Sweden, all these places, they would do these sacrifices. And I'm thinking, that's all great for the people doing this, but for these victims, I don't care how much you want to slice it and dice it to have been sacrificed just for whatever the reason. I don't know. I'm sure none of those priests ever said, I'll take the place of, I'll be the sacrificial victims. Not, I've never seen that. So anyway, let's get on to the second story. This is out of Unilad, and it's titled Bermuda Triangle Diver Who Searched Thousands of Shipwrecks Hits Back at Paranormal Claims. It might be one of the places most talked about with superstition, But that hasn't stopped one man from regularly diving at the Bermuda Triangle. Meet Michael C. Barnett, a diver and marine biologist who has spent years diving in wrecks around the infamous body of water. Located in the West Atlantic Ocean, the Bermuda Triangle has become infamous for the many ships and aircraft which have disappeared there over the years. Barnett has spent a long time diving in the area, including at the wrecks of ships themselves to explore them. It's now been documented as a part of a film called The Bermuda Triangle Into Cursed Waters, set to premiere on November 14th on the History Channel. So here we're talking about 2 weeks ago. But despite the film's captivating title, he has said that he doesn't want to buy into the mythology surrounding the area. He wrote, "I don't entertain the paranormal. I think everything has a rational explanation. For better or worse, the Bermuda Triangle captures people's imagination." Not only that, but he also urged people to be considerate when thinking about the area. As captivating as the stories are, these are still people who have been lost at sea. He wrote, "When we find these ships, we can provide a rational explanation for their losses and share that it's not an abstract thing, this triangle with mystical properties. There are human stories, there are human lives lost when a ship founders in a storm or an aircraft disappears. It is also worth noting that ships are often nowhere near as intact as we might think them to be. There are many factors which could have impact on the state of a shipwreck over time. These include the water quality and temperature, whether the location is sheltered from currents, what material the ship is made of, and any marine life, which often makes a home for itself in a wreck. All this means that wrecks can deteriorate quickly once they're on the seafloor." Barnett said, "A lot of people think about shipwrecks as a Hollywood movie, a vessel sitting at the bottom of the sea intact like a ghost ship. That's just not the case unless it sank hours beforehand. For example, the Titanic, possibly the most famous shipwreck of all time, is in two pieces, having split in half as it sank. Meanwhile, a vessel like the medieval battleship, the Mary Rose, is notably principally because of how incredibly well preserved it is. With all that, would you risk going into the Bermuda Triangle?" And the truth is, because I was born and raised in Miami, which is one of the corners or one of the points of the Bermuda Triangle, is, and I've lived through hurricanes, and absolutely, you understand that there's, hurricanes, especially before the time of weather prognostication. You could go out there and you could easily get caught in any of these storms, and that's it. You're done with. But and I think that part of the unusualness is there's people that have gone out there that haven't sank or disappeared, whether they're in a plane or in a boat or whatever, who have had anomalies happen to their instruments. Okay, and same thing also with people on their boats. Things happen with their instrumentation, and then there's other, especially more modern times, where certain, again, ships, whether it's on the sea or in the air, have disappeared without any type of reference. All right, no, there was a bad storm and we're thinking it sank or whatever. Just very weird. In other words, it's developed that reputation because the disappearances are beyond the norm. So, one of those deals. Anyway, um, there's a part of this article that says the long-standing mystery of the Bermuda Triangle has actually been solved. What is the Bermuda Triangle? The Devil's Triangle is a deadly area between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, which is known to have sucked in planes and ships over the years. The region covers 700,000 kilometers of ocean, which is 270,000 square miles, and is a highly busy patch of sea. However, there have been numerous conspiracy theories pointing towards the existence of supernatural power or extraterrestrial invaders capturing humans for their experimental studies. Back in 2017, Carl Kruselnicki, an Australian scientist, busted the myth about the high number of disappearances by stating the most common yet simple scientific fact. According to Kruselnicki, the Bermuda Triangle's unsolved mysteries are likely due to human error and bad weather owing to its close proximity to the equator. The Australian scientist said, "It is close to the equator, near a wealthy part of the world, America, therefore you have a lot of traffic." He emphasized the similarity between the number of disappearances at the Bermuda Triangle and any other part of the area in the world. Kruzolnicki reiterated the fact that the region where the ships enter the Atlantic Ocean does not exhibit any unusual characteristics and there is nothing out of the ordinary about it. According to Lloyd's of London and the U.S. Coast Guard, the number that go missing in the Bermuda Triangle is the same as anywhere in the world on a percentage basis, he added. Let's talk about the vanishing of Flight 19. On December 5, 1945, Flight 19 was a training flight of 5 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers that took off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It had 14 crew members, and every member was an experienced Navy airman. I'm going to interject this. No, they weren't. They were all in training. So I don't know why they're saying that. The only one that had experience was the head guy. All of these other guys that were there were trainees. Flight 19 was running a routine 2-hour mission over the Atlantic when the fateful incident took place and lost all radio signals with the airbase. However, as unbelievable as it may sound, a BPM Mariner flying boat with a crew of 13 was sent to search for Flight 19, which also vanished into thin air. Kruzolnicki analyzed and answered the conspiracy theory with simple explanations for the loss of Flight 19 and the PBM Mariner. It wasn't fine weather. There was 49-foot waves. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, an experienced pilot in the flight, suffered at the hands of his own fate. The radio signals could be heard where the junior pilot insisted on flying the plane to the west, but was dismissed by Taylor, who continued to fly the craft to the east and deep into the deadly zone. However, the mystery was long since solved back in 1975 when a librarian historian, David Kush, published his investigations about the phenomena. After a comprehensive examination of the official reports on the ships, he arrived at the conclusion that the reason for their disappearance was largely attributed to adverse weather conditions, and in some instances remnants of the vessels were retrieved. What do you think? I'm going to tell you what I think. No, this gentleman right here, the main guy, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, during the war, because remember, this is right after the end of World War II. Same thing. He went down in the Pacific in his ship, and in other words, he was known to, and they were saying he was a weird kind of guy, and he already had a prior incident where he went down with his airplane, and he was in a training mission, but this was in the Pacific. Very similar to this. All right. As a matter of fact, his mom went on and petitioned vigorously with the Navy because they were, in their reports, they were basically blaming him for the disappearance or the loss of the planes that were with him. And she petitioned, and finally they reversed it to like unknown reasons why the planes disappeared. And again, that doesn't, I don't know. I've always heard that the weather was good, that they were, as a matter of fact, they were doing a bombing run off of Bimini and the rescue ship. Why wouldn't they know? This is 1945. Back then they knew there was weather reports that they were going into bad weather. I don't know. There's something there. I personally think that that there's an anomaly, and I'm not talking here supernatural. I think that there's some type of anomaly that affects either through a magnetic field or a hiccup or burp of the magnetic field, which messes with the instrumentation, where all of a sudden you can't follow your instruments. That's what I think. So there's my explanation for the Bermuda Triangle. This is former NASA astronaut recalls what it's like flying through the Bermuda Triangle of space. Space anomalies are something most of us won't experience, but for one astronaut, this experience became one of their most memorable and shocking. Terry Virts, 55, was selected as a space shuttle pilot by NASA in 2000 after serving in the United States Air Force. His first space flight happened on February 8, 2010, when he was on board the Space Shuttle Endeavour. On the 5th night of the mission, things took a drastic turn as he encountered a strange phenomena. Known colloquially as the Bermuda Triangle of Space, Virts witnessed what is officially known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, or SAA, which is a combination of a massive flash of light without any sound. Not only is the SAA an odd sight to behold, it also wreaks havoc on computers nearby and exposes humans close by to higher radiation levels, hence the nickname. In an interview with the BBC, Virts explained that what Van Allen radiation belts are to help us understand the SAA. Quote, I closed my eyes and boom, This gigantic, white, blinding flash happened in my eyes, and I didn't hear anything, Vert said. We have an acronym for everything at NASA, and these are SEUs, single event upsets. It just means your computer hiccups, and it happens fairly often. Van Allen radiation belts are two enormous donut-shaped areas of charged particles that surround the Earth. They are held in place by our planet's magnetic field. Vert said, the sun puts out a huge amount of radiation, and a lot of it is particles like electrons shot off the sun's surface. All of this material gets shot out in space, and the sun's magnetic field can bend it. When it gets to Earth, it gets trapped in our magnetic field and forms these radiation belts out in space. Earth's Van Allen belts protects the planet from the highly charged electronic particles thrown from the sun, but there's a catch. Here's something that may come as a surprise to people. Earth is not perfectly round. But before the flat Earth celebrate, before the flat earthers celebrate, well, the planet is spherical. It bulges out more at the equator than at the poles, which is caused by the centrifugal force created by its constant rotation. Its magnetic poles aren't completely in line with its geographical poles, meaning it is tilted, and therefore the Van Allen belts are also tilted. The SAA occurs where the inner Van Allen radiation belt is at its lowest altitude and therefore at its closest point to Earth. Because of the tilt, the magnetic field is at its strongest in the north, which leaves the areas above the South Atlantic and Brazil in the direct path of the Van Allen belt. Although it is not dangerous to Earth, satellites and other spacecraft, such as the International Space Station ISS, that pass through the area aren't as lucky. The same can be said for the people on board, which Verts knows all too well. You want to kind of get through there as fast as you can on the way to the moon or wherever you're going, he said. Spacecraft passengers protect themselves from radiation with water, which is the best shield. On the ISS, the astronauts use a water wall, which is just a bunch of these big 50-pound water bags. Each astronaut carries a radiation monitor, and radiation levels are closely monitored for the duration of space missions. Wow. Interesting, see? I guess I'm not far off from why those things happen in the Bermuda Triangle. All right, the next story is also out of Stories of the Supernatural, and it's titled Buried in Obscurity. And July 31st, 1973 was the last time Mary Raskin knew exactly where her son Joseph Joey Norman Spears was at. He was only 17 years old when he escaped from the Harrison County Youth Detention Center in Mississippi. Since then, it was as if the earth had swallowed him up, and in a way it had. Less than a month later, on August 23rd, 1973, an unknown young man was hit and killed by a vehicle as he was crossing the Gulf Freeway in Texas City, Texas. He didn't have any form of identification. He was shirtless and wearing a pair of jeans. The county medical examiner determined that he was 17 to 18 years of age. He had dark shoulder-length hair, blue eyes, a mustache, and goatee, and he had a circular scar on one of his wrists. By September 21st, 1973, the body remained unclaimed, and in an effort to identify him, they ran a short story describing him, and that the body would be kept for 2 more weeks before it would be buried in an unknown cemetery. The story included a touched-up picture of the young man. However, no one came forward to give him a name. The Texas City community donated a funeral service, casket, and a grave at the Hayes Grace Memorial Park in Hitchcock, Texas, and there he is laid unknown and undisturbed, until an employee of the cemetery, Chelsea Davidson, started efforts to identify the remains of this young man and bring peace to his family. She combed through different databases that provided information on missing persons, but with no success, until she came across information about Spears that had been entered in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, acronym NAMUS, in 2013 by the Harrison County Sheriff's Department after a family member had contacted them to get an update on the missing persons report issued for Joey Spears. The description of Joseph Spears matched those of the John Doe buried in 1973, including the scars on his wrist. Davidson contacted Christy Johnson with the Sheriff's Department, who was assigned to the cold case, and by February 2016, the body was exhumed with the hope of identifying the body via a DNA sample. Despite the body being very well preserved since he had been buried in a sealed vault, the Galveston Medical Examiner's Office was unable to get a proper DNA sample. The investigators in Texas and Mississippi compared the facts each had about this young man and eventually turned to his mother, Mary Raskin, to identify if this was indeed her son's remains, which he confirmed after viewing pictures taken during his autopsy. Joey Spears belonged to a military family, and they moved where their father's career in the U.S. Navy took him. On August 19, 2016, his body was released to a funeral home in Texas, which would cremate the remains and send it to his family in California. And you know what? And it's good that, at least they had some type of closures, because we're talking here 83, 93, 2003, 40, almost 40 years later. They find out, even though I imagine the family at some point realized that something had happened to him, and you never have the backstory why this 17-year-old was running around. If I remember correctly, when I read the article on this, he was even wearing like a rope belt, like he was in a detention center. Like, what happened to him that led him? Obviously, he had a family that led him to run away and act this way and end up getting run over and unidentified. Sad story in a way, but at least the family found out what happened to him. Then we're going to go to the vintage news, and this is titled "The Tree Under Which Isaac Newton Discovered Gravity Still Alive and Well." It outlived Newton. Isaac Newton is among the most famous figures in the history of mathematics, philosophy, and science. He's probably best known for his theory of gravity, which he alleged came to him after an apple fell on his head while sitting under a tree at his birthplace at Woolsthorpe Manor. What many don't realize is that this historic tree is still around centuries later. Isaac Newton was born on December 25th, 1642 in Woolsthorpe by Colsterworth, Lincolnshire. The English polymath showed an aptitude for math and science early on, largely due to his attending the King's School, which taught a host of advanced subjects. This was followed by his admission to Trinity College at Cambridge, where he delved headfirst into philosophy and math. Following his education, he helped develop infinitesimal calculus along with German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and turned into a central figure in both the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment, a period of both intellectual and philosophical growth in Europe. That's not all Newton accomplished during his 84 years on this earth. He was instrumental in the formulation of the laws of gravitation and motion, which he documented in his 1867 work, The Principal Mathematical Principles. I'm reading, but I think that it can't be 1867, because if he was born in 1642, okay, I imagine it's going to have to be 1567. Yeah, it's 1560, which he documented as 1567 work, The Principia Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, and was among those to look into early modern chemistry. On top of that, he also invented the reflecting telescope, which uses curved mirrors to reflect light and create an image, and proposed a new theory of light and color. Did an apple really fall on Isaac Newton's head? According to Isaac Newton, he was able to form his theory of gravity after an apple fell on his head while he sat beneath a tree at Woolsthorpe Manor, his birthplace. There's debate among historians as to whether or not this event actually happened, or if it's a myth. But there's no doubt the polymath frequently shared the anecdote with others, including John Conduit, Catherine Barton, and French philosopher Voltaire. Recalling what Newton told him in the biography Memoirs of Sir Isaac Newton's Life, Williams to Kelly wrote, "After dinner, the weather being warm, we went into the garden and drank tea under the shade of some apple trees, only he and myself amidst other discourse. He told me he was just in the same situation as when formerly the notion of gravitation came into his mind." There's no way to know for sure the authenticity of the story. It could have happened and simply been embellished over the centuries. But with the man at the center of the tale long gone, it looks like historians will never know for sure. While no one is 100% sure which is the exact tree Isaac Newton was sitting beneath when he thought up his theory of gravity, the majority have a pretty good idea, as there's one in the family orchard that dates back over 400 years, having been regrown from surviving roots after it was blown down during a particularly intense storm in 1816. Known for growing the flower of Kent, a cooking apple, The tree still exists to this day. It's taken care of by gardeners employed at Woolsthorpe Manor and the National Trust for Places of Historic Interest or Natural Beauty. To ensure no one damages it, a fence was erected. Trees are known to live for centuries, and no one wants anyone or anything to ruin this important piece of history. While the fact the tree exists is incredible in and of itself, what's even more spectacular is that it has spawned clones that grow all across the world. The most famous is the one growing at Trinity College, which is genetically identical, and Loughborough was gifted 5 cuttings from the original tree, which which have allowed the school to grow on its own versions. The University of York is home to a tree that was propagated from one at Woolsthorpe Manor by Reverend Charles Turner in 1820, and boy, did it have an adventure. The school was its final stop, while it traveled from Belton Park to a fruit research station in Kent to the Cambridge Botanical Gardens to Kew Gardens. It was the latter that ultimately gifted it to York. Among the other locations where descendants of the original continue to thrive are the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Cambridge, Massachusetts, Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, Turnish Hochschule Wildau in Berlin, Germany, and the National Physical Laboratory in Greater London, just to name a few. And, since I've had micro farms, this is the thing, not when which is why you have cuttings, even when you're planting new trees. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen those grafts, because the graft or the cuttings is a clone. It's the same age. In other words, it thinks it's the same age. So if you plant it, let's say you're talking about a fruit-bearing tree, it's not like a seedling, which sometimes, depending on the type of tree, might take years to bear fruit. A cutting thinks or knows, it's 20 years old, so it will immediately, maybe the first or second year, bear fruit. That's why in most nurseries, that's what they sell are cuttings, or that's what you should be looking for, because they give fruit very quickly. So yes, it is a clone. There you go. So let's go back to Stranger Than Fiction stories. And the next story is titled 10 Miles to Nowhere. It was Saturday, the day before Halloween 1926, when Marvin Aaron Clark, one-time marshal from Linton, Oregon, took a motor stage to Portland. He's never been seen since. Clark was born in Iowa in 1852. Along with his wife, Mary Ann Leach, nee Lewis, a young widow with 2 young children, they ended up in Linton, Oregon, where he worked as the marshal of the small lumber town. Mary Ann had her own tragic history. Prior to meeting Marvin, she was married to John P. Leach, and by 1879 she had 2 small children, William and Sidney. John Leach was described by the newspapers of the day as a well-to-do farmer, speaking from a financial standpoint, but a hell of a to-do husband whose brutal instincts seemed to have such control of him that his wife lived in constant fear of her life. It was said she was literally covered with bruises and scars, and her life was constantly threatened by her husband. The couple was living in the Dakota Territories when Mary's brother, William Lewis, who lived in Wisconsin, came for a visit in November 1882. Since his arrival, Leach had threatened to kill him as well. Young Lewis, who was 20 years old, was confronted by Leach in the railway station waiting room at Alexandria. They had an altercation about Leach abusing his sister. Leach hit him and they grappled. Leach, who was 32 years old, threw the young man on the floor. Lewis got out his revolver and fired 3 shots. The last one hit his brother-in-law in the heart. A week later, a coroner's jury exonerated Lewis, finding a verdict that it was in self-defense. Leach, a member of Wisconsin's voluntary infantry, was no stranger to violence. In 1876, he damaged the window, table, and pail at jailhouse in Iowa County, Wisconsin, while he was in custody. In 1880, he had been arrested for a knife fight at the Custer House on Capitol Street. Leach had just sold a farm and left his widow with a small fortune of $5,000. Mary Ann married Marvin on February 21st, 1885. Perhaps it was these experiences that propelled the couple to move to the West Coast, which they did by 1888. They went on to have 5 more children. It was said that Clark knew the area above St. Helens Highway very well, and he was still well recognized by the townspeople of Tigard, where the family had moved to. Because of a partial paralysis to one side of his body, the 73-year-old walked with a limp. He wore wire-rimmed eyeglasses and leather high top boots. The trip from Tigard to Portland was only 10 miles, and it was 2 days before his wife realized he had not made it to his stepdaughter's home at 735 Hoyt Street. This was the Hereford Hotel that she lived at and managed as well. She notified the police, and they got a lead that he was seen at the terminal at Salmon Street. According to Sidney McDougal, she said the visit by her stepfather was unplanned since he had been at her home a few days before. It was not until November 6th that his disappearance was published by the newspapers. On November 19, 1926, Mary Clark received a postcard from Bellingham, Washington, apparently from Marvin. Several witnesses said they saw him there between November 2nd and 3rd. It was unknown if this was a joke or actually written by Clark, who might have become disoriented. Due to paralysis on his right side, he walked with a halting gait. He had gray eyes, white hair, and mustache, was about 5 feet 8 inches tall, and weighed about 170 pounds. The family feared he was taken ill, and he could not be identified at any place he would have been taken to for medical attention. They made calls to the hospitals and undertakers in the area, but they had no one that fit his description. The family offered a $100 reward. Notices were sent to police departments across the Northwest, with a full description including that he walked with a hanging gait. The reward was never claimed. The years marched forward, and Marvin's wife Mary died in 1930. It wasn't until 60 years later that authorities thought they had found Marvin Clark. On May 10, 1986, loggers found a full skeleton of a man with a Harrington and Richards .32 caliber revolver next to him, along with one expended bullet, where the remains were an 1888 nickel, an 1881 silver dollar, and an 1896 quarter. These were tavern tokens commonly used from 1890 to about 1920 that were awarded in card games and could be used to buy food or alcohol. He also had a Sears Roebuck and Company pocket watch, a mechanical lead pencil, wire-rimmed eyeglasses, and a Fraternal Order of Eagles pocket knife. The man wore clothing used during the years Clark disappeared. He had on high-top shoes with laces called police loafers. The medical examiner ruled it a suicide since a single shot was fired at the skull and exited at the temple. There appeared to be a contact wound. The man was estimated to be 5 feet 9 inches and could have been from 35 to 55 years old. It appeared he had been there since sometime during the early 1920s. Due to the isolated area of northwest Multnomah County where he chose to take his life, the remains had lain hidden for many years. The secluded ravine was in Linton, which was annexed by Portland almost 100 years before. Upon the discovery of the remains in 1986, Dorothy Willoughby contacted detectives to say it might be her grandfather, Marvin Clark, who disappeared in 1926. She said he was depressed over medical problems and occasionally used a cane. Perhaps there was also heartbreak, since Marvin and Mary had lost a daughter, Myra, in 1921 after she was badly burned with grease she was cooking with. She was 27 years old. Dorothy Willoughby died in 1991 before any conclusive evidence could be found to confirm the identity of the skeleton. In 2011, DNA was taken from the remains. It wasn't until 2014 that 3 great-great-grandchildren were found from the paternal family that showed encouraging results, but no definitive links. The ME's office was hoping to find family from the maternal side to confirm the findings. In 2018, Pam Knowles, a great-great-granddaughter of Clark, provided DNA samples along with her son. This comparison proved the DNA did not belong to Clark, and he is still considered a missing, in parentheses, deceased person, because he would be dead by now no matter what, even if he disappeared. So, what happened to Marvin Clark? Somebody who had gone to visit his stepdaughter in a 10-mile trip, and he just totally disappeared. And the last story is out of the Miami Herald. This is titled Pregnant Creature with 545 Eggs Found on a Mountain in Angola. It's a new species. Under the cover of darkness, a group of patterned creatures gathered around a rocky pool on a mountain in Angola. It was the animal's breeding season. The activity, however, was interrupted by passing scientists. Researchers ventured into the Serra de Namba Mountains in southern Africa on several surveys between 2016 and 2020, according to a study published November 10th in the journal Vertebrate Zoology. They set out at night during the rainy season to search for amphibians, and they succeeded. In small pools and on moist rocks, researchers found 15 toads with a distinct hourglass-shaped pattern. The study said, taking a closer look, they realized they discovered a new species. Oh my God, how do you... Pointinophorus nambensis, or the Namba pygmy toad. I'll go with Namba pygmy toad. The Namba pygmy toad is considered medium-sized, reaching about 1.4 inches. Researchers said it has a robust body, noticeable warts, and a rough texture of skin. Female toads are larger and rougher than males. Photos show the Namba pygmy toad. Overall, its body is brownish gray with some lighter beige spots and brighter orange patches. On its back, the toad has a paler blotch that searchers described as hourglass-shaped. Namba pygmy toads live in rocky mountain areas surrounded by grasslands, the study said. They were found breeding and mating in wet environments. A photo shows one of these environments, a rocky pool. One female toad was pregnant with 545 eggs and later gave birth in captivity, researchers said. A photo shows these black and white eggs. The new species has only been found around the Serra de Namba mountains between elevations of about 5,700 feet and about 6,000 feet. According to the study, researchers said they named the new species after this area where it was discovered. The Serra de Namba mountains are in Kwanza Sul province, along Angola's western coast. Angola borders the Atlantic Ocean to the west, the Democratic Republic of the Congo to the north, Zambia to the east, and Namibia to the south. The new species was identified by its coloring pattern and other subtle physical features. The study said DNA analysis found the new species had between about 6% and about 12% genetic divergence from other pygmy toads. The research team included Ninda Baptista, yada yada. Researchers also discovered a second new species of pygmy toad. You know what? I think it's the reason why I think this is fascinating, because for all the times that we think that everything has been explored or discovered on the earth, I beg to differ. Everybody's thinking, let's like Elon, let's go to Mars, or let's go here, let's go there. I think there's plenty to be discovered here on Earth, terra firma, including new species. All right. So I know there's people going out there. Yeah, does that mean Bigfoot really might exist? Who knows? But my point is, not everything is known. Not everything has been discovered. Believe me. So until next time, I will be back with more weird and eerie news. Take care.